Australia is being urged to completely overhaul its defence posture because of a growing potential threat from China. Joining me is Malcolm Davis from the Australian Strategic Policy Institute for more on this. Thanks for your time today. So the report out today, this talks about a formal defence alliance with Japan, and essentially what you're citing as a concern here is at the moment our priority is sort of securing immediately to our north and being able to fend off any potential attack there. You want to shift that further north so that we're not engaged in potential conflict so close to our shores.
Yeah, look, I wrote the report to identify the challenge that's being emerging from China in particular in terms of what's known as anti-access and area denial capabilities, in particular their long-range strike capabilities, the sort of long-range cruise missile and ballistic missile type technologies that they're now starting to field. And our traditional defence strategy has always been about defending that area to our immediate north known as the Sea Air Gap. But as China's military capabilities begin to evolve further and further, it's becoming more difficult to defend that Sea Air Gap. So my approach is to push our defence posture further north in what I call forward defence in depth.
So we're talking about simply the range of some of these weapons China's developing and where they're placing them. What does this mean for the efficacy of our submarine fleet, which is still being built?
Look, I think the submarines are still important.
Right.
If you are talking about doing forward defence in depth, then submarines and long-range air power are really the only two forms of capability that we can use to project
So
power.
their importance from this report isn't reduced at all?
Sorry?
The importance of the submarines from this report today isn't reduced at all?
No, I don't think so. I think that what the problem with the submarines is that they're going to take too long to come on station. They're going to take too long to be built. And so we have a challenge in the next decade of how do we project power further north, and that's where developing closer relationships with Japan in particular is important.
So one of the interesting aspects of this, you're talking about forward deploying assets to bases in places including Japan, but also Guam, Papua New Guinea as well. What would the likely reaction be from China if we were to do that?
Oh, they won't like it. But frankly, we have a right to defend ourselves, and we have a right to ensure the security and the stability of the region. And when you have an assertive China that is seeking to control the South China Sea and project its power even further forward, then I think we have every right to respond to that. So I'm sure Beijing won't like this paper, but frankly, that's not my concern.
No, fair enough. You've got your Team Australia badge on, perhaps. You speak about this trilateral defence alliance between Washington, Tokyo and Canberra. Can we offer to Tokyo and Washington something that brings us in and elevates us to that level? Will they say, well, hang on, you're just Australia, your attributes are not enough to elevate yourself to that group, if you like, where we're sort of one in, all in?
Look, I think it's important that we don't shortchange ourselves. Australia is incredibly important to the US in particular in terms of support we give, the capabilities we offer.
The geography.
The geography. One area in particular, space, for example, we're critically located to support US space surveillance. And our ability to develop modern capabilities and work side by side with the Americans is highly valuable.
And the space element is increasingly important within defence, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I think the same thing can be said for Japan. We can be a critical partner for Japan as well. And I think the trends are moving in that direction towards closer defence relations between Tokyo and Canberra.
Now, when we're talking about the weapons as well from China, and I know this is always theoretical and you've got to sort of plan for the worst, but are you saying there's an increased likelihood that they would in some way create a conflict with Australia? Well,
I think the scenario is likely to be a conflict, for example, emerging out of a Chinese attack on Taiwan or a Chinese-US clash in the South China Sea that expands and then Australia becomes involved.
We get involved because of commitments made to the US and to Taiwan.
And certainly, with US forces based here in Australia, I think it's highly unlikely in a large-scale war that China would allow those US forces in northern Australia, for example, to go unmolested. So it's more likely that we would come under attack in that sort of scenario.
Do you see China moving in some way? They've got this long-term commitment to truly bring Taiwan into its orbit, to control it at some point. And Taiwan's clearly resisting and trying to get more weapons now from the US, 100 high-tech tanks to do so. Do you see China at some form of invasion as inevitable?
Look, Xi Jinping made it clear earlier in the year that he fully intends to reunify Taiwan with China, irrespective of whether that requires war or not. And so I think he's committed to that. He's got a lot of political prestige invested into that. So I think the chances of a conflict over Taiwan are increasing, and the prospects of that sort of conflict happening in the next decade are quite significant.
Just one other issue in the area as well, a possible third summit now being floated between Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump. And I mean, a lot of people would have thought, is this really going to happen, given it seemed both of them were essentially walking away from key tenets of the progress that was being made before. What do you make of this?
Look, I think Trump clearly wants a summit because he's desperate for a deal. But I think he's going to be disappointed because the North Koreans are not going to denuclearise. And until the North Koreans denuclearise, no further progress can be made. So I think there might be a third summit, but I think it will be a repetition of Hanoi. And I don't think there'll be a successful outcome.
We've got almost a clock ticking scenario, don't we, with next year being a presidential year. And this is part of an age-old problem with the US trying to make any difference in North Korea. One person's got the job for life, the other one doesn't.
Absolutely. And North Korea's nuclear weapons and missile capabilities are not reducing, they're increasing. So the longer this goes on, the more dangerous it gets, not only for the US, but also for US allies such as Japan and South Korea.
Malcolm Davis from ASPI, thanks very much for your time today.
Thank you very much.